have, as I mentioned last week, why is have a strong sort of desire or commitment for this particular series is because I'm concerned about our founder, Lama Yeshe's lineage being preserved. Now, doesn't mean that I can preserve it, or how does a lineage get preserved? We talked about that a little bit last week. So preserving a lineage, the reason we would want to preserve Lama Yeshe's lineage is because of his unique qualities and style of transmitting the teachings, and also his unique place in history in terms of, that was sort of the renaissance of the Tibetan Buddhist teachings coming into the modern world, the Western world. And when we talked about lineage last week, I think that fundamentally we came down to, what makes a lineage, and I guess there's different kinds of lineages maybe, but in the context of a spiritual lineage, which this is, we would be referring to, I think a couple key elements of a lineage is that it's the experience in this context of Tibetan Buddhist spiritual teachings. It's the transmission of the experience of these teachings and not so much the intellectual, the academic transmission. Although without that, we can't really have a lineage either. So we do have a lineage of published texts and, written, all the way from the Buddha. You could say that those texts that have what to say, carried on through the traditions, through the millennium. We could call those a lineage too. And I think one of the things that's very fascinating, very attractive about Buddhist teachings is that you can't actually change the words of the Buddha or the words of a master. Like we're not really sure how much, for example, the Bible has changed. So there's some kinds of doubts. Well, we know it's changed. I mean, it almost states it in terms of the different councils they had, and over the many thousand, hundreds of years. Anyway, so when we look at Buddhist teachings, we feel that everything arises from what the Buddha said. And 25 plus 100 years ago, it wasn't about, they weren't writing these teachings down. I don't believe the writing down of the teachings happened, I believe, about 500 years after the Buddha passed away. So how did they keep the lineage, which is very fascinating, because if you spend time just going to any, Tibetan Buddhist monastery, where the Himalayan monks are resident and studying, and their studies are very robust. The younger monks spend most of their times, it's really interesting, it's sort of a traditional approach of learning things by rote, but they also memorize. And it's just fascinating how, it's just mind-blowing. For example, I was just in Nepal for some weeks, and at our monastery, Kopan, and every evening, all the monks, it was warm enough, they come out into the courtyard, and we're talking about 300 monks or something. I don't know if they would all doing it because they have different classes, but these are the monks that are probably early pre-teen or early teen, and they're out there for an hour and a half, 2 hours. They have no text in front of them, and as a group, and there's maybe 5, 6 different groups all around the courtyard, are reciting these prayers. It is a memorization. It's from their memorization class they have earlier in the day, or they might do it on their own. I can't remember. Sometimes they do it as a class. Sometimes they're given homework, and they go into their rooms and try and remember. But here they are. I mean, they go for at least an hour, and very fast. So you wonder, how many pages is that? And that's just one evening. And they do that all year long. So that practice, or that practice, it's a lineage in a sense. That practice is arose from the time of the Buddha, and it's interesting with all our devices now to have access to all our information, that it seems that the power of memory is decreasing, you know, and also because we're not reading as much. So these lineages, these teachings were handed orally from teacher to student to teacher to student. So that's why they're uniform. If you go to any different, we have in Tibetan Buddhism, there are 4 different traditions, we could say. All the 4 traditions arise from all the same teachings. And the texts that they memorize in the Nyingma tradition or the Gelug tradition or Kagyu tradition or Shakya tradition will be the same. They'll often you have ceremonies, pujas, where other monks from other traditions come to, like when Lama Zopa Rinpoche passed away, and over each year we have a annual commemoration, this large gathering, a ceremony of monks reciting these prayers. And many of these prayers and these practices, they all know them, all the traditions. Now, there's others that are just sometimes specific to that tradition, kind of like a university, but there's also many that they can recite any of the actual teachings of the Buddha himself. They all will be reciting the same thing. It's pretty amazing. And they'll go on for hours. It's like, how do you do that? And it's also, could also ask, why do they do that? Well, the why is because that's what carries on a lineage. That's what carries on the tradition. In that sense, it's an oral lineage. It's an oral tradition. And that's really, I don't know what's going to happen as we get more and more modernized. I don't know what, we don't memorize stuff. We have it all at our fingertips, through our devices and through the internet and through books, right? But there's something, a quality of mind that they achieve that we know is quite, it's like when you memorize songs or memorize poems, it's a quality of mind. So in the context of Lama Yeshe and Lama Yeshe series, as mentioned last week, that Lama Yeshe was the founder of our present organization, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, long name. And he was very, very much a visionary. I mean, we're still influenced by his ideas way back then. He was truly remarkable. I mean, the visionary, he was a visionary, very much so, but the visionary part, sometimes we could say, arises from their attainments. So in our Buddhist tradition, Buddhist meaning the awakening tradition, right? Because ideally it'd be better if we didn't have these Sanskrit words. I mean, it's interesting, we've kept them. English is like that, I think. But, if we look at not any, but I don't know any of, I know a little bit of Tibetan. Nepali I know, but Nepali is a Sanskrit-based language, so it uses the Sanskrit words, obviously. But Tibetan, they don't say Buddhist. They have a Tibetan word for Buddhist, okay? So they translated all these teachings from the Sanskrit and the Pali into and Chinese and into Tibetan. Tibetan didn't have a written language also when the teachings first started coming. And if you look at the Tibetan alphabet, the script, it has many similarities to Sanskrit script, so it was modeled off of that. That was about 600, 700 AD before they really started, I think, had a written language and started. And there was Buddhism that was the influence of that language. So when the Buddhist teachings or this Buddhist spiritual path, in one way, what Lama Yeshe was influencing us very strongly was that it is an individual path. It is an individual path. When I'm meditating or experiencing, let's say I have experience of the awakening mind or emptiness, and Leah has experience of awakening mind and emptiness, our words are not the thing. And so our experience will probably be very, very similar, the same. But then how she chooses, or because of her personality, to express it and I express it might be very different, right? Also with Lama Yeshe, as I mentioned, the title of this class, Are We Communicating? Excuse me, Are We Communicating, Dear? Is because his fundamental, I would say, number one goal or wish was to communicate. And someone asked me last week, how did he learn English so well? I mean, his English is funny, but he expresses himself completely, right? I mean, it's very, very easy to understand. He comes right into your brain and in your heart, and you can go, and he can communicate with, and he could communicate with anybody. I told the story of my parents last week. That was his gift, you could say, and not just his gift, but it was also his wish. So I think what I would say is to communicate one of Lama's fundamental principles would be he would want to communicate and he would want to continue the understanding that these teachings and these ideas are all experiential. Okay. And it's not the form that really makes it Buddhist. It's not the water bowls, it's not the statues. He was very courageous in saying these things. It's not the prostrations, okay? It's not the prayer wheel. As much as we're drawn to all those objects because we're very object focus. We're very external, and that's fine. That's good because the point of it is that depending on Buddhist spiritual awakening attempts to communicate to any level of being, even ants and mosquitoes. Because if you watch our Lama Yeshe's predecessor, following, no, predecessor means follower, the one after no, that's before his, what do you call it? Successor, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was a lot about, I mean, he was everything. But one of the things he was really massively influential about was objects. Why? People say, oh, it's so religious. It's just so, no, it wasn't that. It was because depending on certain people's or certain beings' level of understanding. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of his projects was to have, I think 100,000 stupas on the ocean floor. So it's like, I mean, the degree of his compassion was unfathomable. Now, Lama Yeshe wouldn't talk about that. That wasn't his style. He would understand it. But what does it mean to have 100,000 stupas in the ocean? It's because Rinpoche would relate to a fish or a mollusk or what are those things? Plankton. Well, they're all the same to him. They all have mind, so they all have potential to attain awakening. Maybe not in that form, right? I don't know if we say that you can attain awakening in the form of a plankton. I don't know. It has mind, so I guess in theory the potential is there, but very hard, right? We even look at our pets. It's very hard for them to. You can say to your pet as you're leaving the house. You can say, okay, I left some food in the cupboard for you. When you get hungry, just open it up and get it. You can't, right? That's when we talk about suffering. Suffering is a terrible word in English. It's not the right word in English, but that means the fact that the dog or cat or whatever, the mouse, doesn't understand what you're saying really, or it doesn't have the capability, and then it gets hungry and it whines and it cries until you come home. You say, well, the food was just right there. That's what, so if we begin to understand this intense Buddhist theory of, because it's essential, it's an essential teaching, was the teachings of suffering. We have to find a new word, right? It means that. It means the inability, right? The inability to actualize its potential. And we can't say all animals are that way, and you can't generalize that way. But excuse me, we generalize with knowing that maybe there's exceptions. Of course, there's always exceptions, right? But in general, we're just talking in general. In general, you can think often about when talking about suffering. Sorry to use the word, hit you over the head with it. But when we talk about suffering, it's really about, well, would you want to be that person? Would you want to be that being? Would you want to be a scorpion? You know, and there's countless animals. Scorpions are in the animal realm. Spiders, fish, birds. That's just the animal realm. I mean, and I forget the number again. I looked up once how many mosquitoes there were in the world, and I think it was quadrillion. And ants are about the same. That's just mosquitoes. You know, 4 quadrillion. I think that's 16 zeros. You know, just mosquitoes. So when we look at that, so I think I think we should be less squeamish about the word or the idea of suffering. More, what might help is like just what's the situation, which is I wouldn't want to be any of those mosquitoes. So that to me kind of indicates that they're in a worse state than me. So I would say, okay, that's suffering. Okay. Where am I going? Lama Yeshe. Was there anything that came up last week? People here, questions that I need to clear up before we go on? Okay. Oh, so I don't know if we ended quite there, but we talked about what is meditation, and um, and the first chapter of this book, Freedom Through Understanding, that we're using, Lama talks about meditation. Do you remember? And the main, I think because we have to say it a lot of times, because we are pretty conditioned into thinking what meditation is. And a lot of times it might be better in the Buddhist idea of meditation. Maybe it's better to think of mind training. I think that's because meditation has so much baggage or descriptions attached to it these days for the last 20 years or something like that, or 34, however long. You know, I mean, where we're talking about mindfulness and we're talking about watching the breath and we're talking about visualization and we're talking about walking meditation. So, what makes something meditation or not meditation? So, this is hard for us to grasp, but I told the story about John Tompa and the scolding the guy at the stupa, you know, who was doing prayers and then he was doing circumambulating and then he was meditating, and John Tompa each day went by him and scolded him and told him, it'd be much better if you practice Dharma. So we can say the same thing. It'd be much better if you're sitting here and this John Tompa comes by and goes, better if you practice meditation. You go, well, what am I doing? So next day you're doing mantra. He comes by, be much better if you're doing meditation. Next day you got your bell and your dorji and you're doing visualization. You're doing much better if you do meditation. So what would he be meaning by that? Okay. Meditation, when we talk about integrating the teachings within our mind, we talk about 3 steps. One is study, or they call it listening. Okay. The second step is to contemplate. So that's really interesting. So it actually means to think about. Like you and I had a discussion where we had some kind of like debate. And then I have to remember that I've done that for years and years, but some people get offended because they think you're arguing. But in the monasteries, debate takes up an hour, 2 hours every day. What it means is it means critical thinking. Okay. So we have to be careful in our culture. Sometimes people feel challenged, or they feel you're arguing or disagreeing, but it doesn't mean it. It means contemplating. So when we talk about an idea, any of these ideas we're talking about. So here we're in the listening phase, right, at the moment. But you're also you're in a contemplation phase. People, you're thinking about, well, what did he just say about meditate? That's the contemplation, kind of chewing it over and coming clear with what the real idea is. Okay. And as we say, don't accept the ideas just because the teacher says it. That, when I heard that, I mentioned that I was very connected with Hindu teachings before I became Buddhist. I was young, and I was really somehow interested in meditation, and there wasn't any real Buddhism that I could find, but Hinduism, yoga was becoming popular. And I was really fascinated. What is this meditation? And so when we look at different sets of teachings, like we look at, and not to compare or criticize, that's not the idea, but when we look at certain faith-based approaches, religions, the idea of contemplation isn't really encouraged, is it? In Buddhism, I think this is why it has a really good fit in modern culture, scientific culture. I also think that's why it's a bit controversial, provocative for some people, because it's not meant to be merely faith-based. Now, interestingly, Buddhism can be anything that works to help people along the path. And certainly in our world, with the myriad levels or personalities of people, just people in that sense, everyone's kind of has a different. Some people are very the way they connect is through faith, you know, and so we meet them there. Lama Yeshe's, his style was not really faith-based. Why? Because he knew he understood the culture that he was looking to communicate with. And the culture he's looking to communicate with in terms of our modern world is rational scientific based. Not only, of course, but that sort of has been the movement of the last 60, 70, 80, 100 years, hasn't it? Even Freud, is really interesting because as I think I'm well, I'm retired now, but licensed marriage family therapist, psychotherapist. And studying Freud became very interesting because we have to do that. Is that what Freud did? And Taria, you can correct me if I got this wrong. Taria is also a therapist. Is that in the dawn of the scientific thinking, late 1900s, early 1800s, early 20th century, the idea of the scientific medical model the medical model was shifting, right? In terms of a science, in terms of the seeds of our modern day medicine. And Freud was a colleague of a lot of these people. I guess was he in Vienna? Was he in Austria or Germany? Austria, I think. Anyway, wherever he was, and they were like today, he was hanging out with these great thinkers, but they were mostly doctors and medical, well, would be doctors, the doctor philosophers. And so while I think that he probably felt psychology was sort of spiritual, he wanted psychology to be accepted. It was a very, very big thing for him, and it was a good thing. So he tried to give psychology put it into the medical model, and it's never quite fit, has it? What we do have I have many clients who go down, or have had many clients who struggle with their have their mental emotional struggles and rely on the medical model to solve it. And it's not that the medical model doesn't offer relief and help sometimes, but it's kind of, it's not, it's when you study psychology, any of us, lay people or professionals, whatever, you have to look at the idea of the word psychology. So psych means psyche, which is soul or mind, right? Spirit, soul, mind. And ology is the study of. So a psychologist would be like what? Psychologist would be someone who studies and promotes the psyche, the understanding of the psyche. But when you study psychology, now I think it's changing. It has changed in little some lately, which is fantastic, but I don't think in terms of mainstream. Here you are studying and become a psychotherapist or psychologist, and you never receive a definition of the mind. It's like okay, I'm going to be a heart surgeon. Well, I think you get a very, very detailed definition, explanation what the heart is. You hope so, right? If you're the patient going in, hey, hey, by the way, did you do you have a definition for the heart before you cut me open? Or brain, right? Or eye, but when I think if you go to any heart surgeon in the world, they'll have the same definition, right? Of what the heart is. But you don't find that in psychology. And you don't find a shared definition of the mind. Taria, do you? No. Isn't that disturbing, Taria? Taria looked at this for years and finally decided, okay, I think Buddhism has the right definition. So Lama Yeshe's view was that this is a psychology. This path is a psychology because the goal of the path is to become mentally healthy. And the ultimate mental health is an awakened mind. It's as simple as that. We shouldn't get more complex than that. The simple thing is, and everybody, every living thing, sure, in a very distracted way, wants to be healthy. Why? Because when we contemplate and when you don't accept what I'm saying, think about this stuff. And then we can discuss it more because it's, I might not be right. I'm still figuring it out, right? But what I think is encouraging is that when you look at, so when I was in other traditions, faith-based traditions, it's all about prayer, excuse me for generalizing, but it's really about prayer and reliance, isn't it? Prayer and reliance, or prayer and refuge. And God, or this higher being, or this higher spirit that's separate from you, is your vehicle to attain awakening or happiness. Because even for the religious, people in different faiths, the reason they do what they do is to be happy. I mean, just fundamentally, without being too complex, why do I reach for the water? No one's going to say, oh, it's to be happy. But in the Buddhists, in this new context that we're beginning to open up to, we're going to say that I drank the water to be happy. And if we can agree on that, what that means, then we're a long way in understanding what it is we're doing with Buddhist thought. So when I say that I'm drinking that to be happy, it comes down to intention, which Lama talks about in this book. So in Buddhist practice, we don't hear it in so many other practices. It's not the practice that makes it a vehicle or a help or not. It's not the practice. Of course, some practices are more designed to be helpful than others. Smoking cigarettes is less designed to help than a meditation practice. But meditation doesn't mean it's a spiritual practice. It doesn't even mean that it's helpful. I mean, it's probably more geared to be helpful, but not necessarily. So what makes meditation helpful or not helpful? Could cigarette smoking be helpful?
Sure, people feel calm and relaxed when they smoke.
Yeah.
And
So yeah, that it can, yeah, if someone's about to have a panic attack, having a cigarette might help. But let's go down to what help really means. Batari, you're right. So when we talk about, see, I was saying in the beginning, meditation in and of itself, we can't say is good or bad. People don't like that, It's like doing yoga is not necessarily good or bad. Yes, it is. You can tell it's good for your health, right? But it comes back to this thing of happiness. What's the flip side of happiness? That's that word we don't like, suffering. We got to find a better word. Okay, so those are just the two sides. Now, what makes something worthwhile or not is the intention. It is the intention. And we don't have control. You could also say the effects, right? The result. So, but the challenge with the result is that there's not total control over results. There's a lot of factors, consequences, conditions that are going to determine the result. So you know how you have the purest intention, you know, I'm going to help Cheryl. She's got this thing she's struggling with, and I come in with the best intention, and then she leaves a half hour later, more upset, more distraught, right? Because I don't have control over all those elements and those conditions because something I said triggered something from her childhood that then she went off and, right? So we have to be a little less, when we're engaged, we should be engaged with intention and a hope for the intention, the hope for the result. Do you know what I mean? Intention with a hope that that's good. Like, so when I go to meet with Cheryl, I have maybe an intention of compassion and wishing to help, right? So I'm doing okay. My intentions are pure. And then the result is that she feels better. So great. That's real. But I don't really have control over that. Now, as we develop this wisdom that Lama Yeshe is referring to, we have a lot more uh, uh, agency over effects, by the way, because we can read deeper and deeper, you know, even to the depth that when we fully develop the potential of our mind, we do develop such high level of sensitivity and awareness that the person can perceive what would, you know, sort of Cheryl's deeper psychology, and can know that this is what's being helpful. That's why with Lama Yeshe, again, the story I told last week, where I was very anxious that my parents, my brother were like wasting his time, and they left, and they all expressed this profound experience, talking about orchids, you know, talking about business, talking about cooking. How does that work? The purity of his intention and the hyper awareness of his perception, you know, hyper awareness of his perception. That's what we can develop. Okay. That's what we develop. Okay. But why? Yeah. 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 You can use the microphone. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So when you went,
Yeah.
so when you mentioned perception and the story that you told us last time,
Yeah.
if some person for the first time,
Right. 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 Okay. Um, First of all, as we become more and more developed, the idea of intention and motivation. So motivation, so in Buddhist psychology, we talk about the 51 mental factors that make up the mind. It's just a scheme, you know, it's just one description. And in those 51 mental factors, which are things like you know, the negative ones, there's 20 negative, and there's 11 positive things like equanimity, non-harmfulness. These are qualities of the mind. They're in the mind that are generally, for most of us, not very activated, not very developed, because the problem is the negative ones tend to overwhelm. The negative ones are things like anger and attachment or desire, strong desire, ignorance or confusion, arrogance. Then there's 21 there's 6 major mental afflictions, we call them, and 21 secondary ones, and then there's 11 positive ones. But then there's these 5, there's also 5 which call always present. So anytime there's a mind, that means even when we're asleep, even when we're dying, even when we go into the intermediate state, As long as there's a mind, there's these five are always present. And one of them is intention. Now, this intention doesn't mean like, oh, see, I really want to be nice to my sister today because we've been having, I'm always mean to her. And, that is an intention. That's not what's meant by this always present intention. The always present intention is simply that when I look at Leah, just in that time, because it's always present, there was an intention. I'm not conscious of it, right? The intention is, who knows where it came, I had a thought. When we become very, very sensitive and aware through meditation, through mind training, I know what my intention is. So the very aware meditator person is aware of his or her mental activity all the time, even down to the nanosecond. Okay. So this intention part, which is one of the five, is always there. So when you meet someone new, there's already an intention there. Okay. What changes is that we begin to manufacture the intention or interfere with the intention, because mostly my intention is to feel good, believe it or not, even at that nanosecond level. Because another part of the five always present mental factors is contact. Means my eye, ear, and through the senses, I make contact with Leah, don't I? I see her, white skin and her gray sweater and her brown hair, all this contact through my eye. Now there's five different cameras. Okay, the five senses. And there's a sixth one, not ESP. It's not meant like that, but because we are talking about sixth sense, it's the mental sense. The mental one is the one that, like, when you think about your home, right? You're not using your eyes or ears, your nose. You're thinking that's the mental sense you're using to connect with that. So we have these six cameras. Okay, so that's contact. So once that person is walking towards you, the person you never met, there's already intention, but it's unconscious intention. And that, I'm going to hammer this word in because we're going to get to a new definition of suffering. That lack of control, that lack of awareness is suffering, is what's meant by suffering. The awaken, and then the flip side we talk about enlightenment, which I prefer to use the awakening, awakened. So when I'm coming to meet you, even right now, I can't see my intentions. I can't see the content. All this process is happening, isn't it? This mental process is happening, but we have no awareness of it. When the reason we do meditation is not to focus on the breath. That's a training. The reason we do focusing on the breath, the reason we do visualization, the reason we do awareness is to simply become aware instant to instant of what's really happening. And the opposite of that, we could say, is lack of clarity, confusion. That's what suffering is. So I'm trying to get this word suffering out a lot today because I don't want it to be this, pain thing. It's not about that. It's confusion. It's lack of knowing. Maybe that's a better way. It's lack of knowing. Okay. I don't know when I'm coming to you. I'm having intention. I'm having contact. And what happens with these five, and this is where it gets this is where it gets super complicated, is we don't just stay with those five: contact, intention, attention, perception. Well, just on my memory. And feeling. Interesting, isn't it? Now, this is not the feeling of, I feel really good when I see Leah. It's subtle because it's happening all the time. So it has to be something we're talking about more subtle. So when I look at your white jacket or shirt, those five things are happening. I also have a feeling about it. A sensation, maybe a better word, sensation. Isn't that weird? Every contact, like you're hearing my voice right now, you're having those five things and you're having a sensation. And there's three sensations. You only have one at a time. Okay. There's either an agreeable sensation, a disagreeable sensation, or neutral sensation. But we're always having one. So why when I look at you and I think, oh, she's a nice lady, right? It's just oh, she seems very friendly, right? Like that. Just quick, isn't it? Just based on those 5 things. Primarily the sensation that arises. So someone else looks at you and gets upset, you know, if you have an enemy or someone you're having a disagreement with. So we're looking at the same person, aren't we? And we say, she's nice, she's not nice. And we believe that, don't we? That's suffering. Because you know why? She's nice, she's not nice is based upon sensation. Isn't it? So it's not, where's the nice and not nice? That confusion is what Buddhist psychology and the path is all about, eliminating that confusion. And the awakening being, the person or very deep, you know, the more perceptive person, through his or her meditation, mostly practice, is heightening that quality of sensitivity, which has a downside. Because what happens when all of a sudden you're seeing everybody's thoughts? They're there. Clairvoyance is not a big deal. The big deal is being sensitive. All the thoughts are happening in this room right now. We don't see them. Why? They're there. They're objects of perception. Why don't we see them? You see the mug, right? It's in the room. It's here. We see the clock and the table and all this stuff. Why don't we, do you think everyone here is thinking, aren't they? Why don't we see that? Everyone here is feeling. Well, if it's happening, maybe we could turn it upside down. Reverse engineer. If it's happening, is it perceptible? Can it be an object of our experience? How many say yes? Yeah, it's happening. It can be an object. It's of our experience, right? There's lots and lots and zillions of things that are not objects of our experience that are happening, aren't there? You know, you remember we were talking last week about going into some primitive culture, I don't know, Amazon or somewhere with your smartphone. And say, it's going to rain tomorrow. And it rains tomorrow, and they think you're amazing, you're clairvoyant, and all those things. But it's not. The information is right there. But we have the ability to perceive it, and they don't. Simple as that. Do you remember that story about what was that? What was that documentary? Shoot. Anyway, someone will remember where it talked about how the Native Americans in South America saw these ships coming in the late 1800s, and they couldn't see the ship because it wasn't an object of their experience yet. I found out that wasn't true, by the way. But in one way, it makes sense. So wait, hang on a second. So one more step. Why when I see that person, I have a feeling of warmth? And why when Leah sees that person, she has a bit of aversion? Why? Okay, so same person, isn't it? Contact, those 5 things are happening. Contact, sensation, perception, all these things are happening. Feeling. So Leah's feeling is maybe a little bit irritating. My feeling is, you know, more like, you know, pleasurable. Why? Same person. Yeah.
Because of
Is it on? She'll turn it on. Try now. Okay. Is it on? Try again.
hello.
Yeah, it's on. It's on.
Yeah, I was saying because of thoughts about previous interactions or biases
Previous interactions.
with other people.
Right. I agree. So interactions with other people, previous experience. right? So when we talked about the 51 mental factors, we just are talking about the 5 that are always there. But there's a bunch of others, right? I talk about 21, 6 major afflictions, 21 secondary, 11 virtuous. So that's kind of like memory, isn't it? Well, of course, it's memory that's very subtle. You know, it's not like remembering my room as a child, right? That's very tangible almost. You know, these are not tangible. So that's another example of suffering because we don't have control. It's like we both are talking to the same person, then we walk away and Leah says, God, I had enough of that person, didn't you? I said, no, I was really enjoying that. You know what I mean? All these assumptions, right? That what we see is true. So this is the fundamental mental disorder in Buddhism. And if we get rid of this one mental disorder, the opposite is awakening. The one mental disorder is we see things incorrectly. Both Leah and I walk away from the person thinking she's this and she's that, right? Which is completely wrong. But we never question that we're wrong. I shouldn't say never, but generally, we never question. And then we have an argument. Yes, she is. No, she's not. Yes, she is. Right? Right? But it's none of that. What it is based on our previous experience. Now, previous experience, then what you're saying is not only do we have this contact and sensation going on inside our brains or inside our minds, but we also have this almost seemingly unlimited amount of previous impressions. Yeah, so that's psychology. We don't have to talk about spiritual path. If we understand that spiritual path is accessing, first being aware that we're influenced by our past interactions. And when we talk about those past interactions, they were all experienced through our 5 senses or our mental sense. Like, for example, when I have a nightmare at night, a dream, that's all the mental sense. That leaves an impression too, doesn't it? All of a sudden you're scared to go to sleep the next night, or, you know, many things could be, right? What do we call those? So those countless experiences, none of them are lost. Might not be aware of them, but none of them are lost. And those they're like imprints, right? Through these 5, 6 cameras. Now you know what karma is. Simple as that. That's the real meaning of karma. Okay, karma, everyone thinks it's like fate or no. Karma means this mental action. Actually, the definition, karma, it means action. And specifically, it's mental action. So if I had no mental action when I see you, then there would be no imprint, right? So what's happening down at Capitola Beach, I have no imprint of right now. I'm not making an imprint. I have from past, right? So that now you can become comfortable that you don't have to get confused anymore when people talk about karma, which they don't know what they're talking about for the most part. Karma simply means primarily these mental imprints that happen continually, constantly, an infinite number almost at a time. Any experience, remember this, any mental experience is karma, meaning any mental experience, my cameras are operating, even when I'm asleep, because there's a mental experience going on. It might be very subtle, it might be very dark, it might be very calm. It doesn't mean there's mental imprints that are good and mental imprints that are bad. Bad and good meaning, do they produce a healthy response or unhealthy response? That's really meaning of good karma, bad karma. So now when people say, "Oh, is my bad karma?" I mean, in theory, you could get your house could get robbed. And you could say, oh, this is my good karma. You could, couldn't you? Your house get robbed and you say, is it always bad karma? No. My house got robbed and you think, thank goodness someone who's really poor was able to eat tonight. I'm so glad I could give that to them. It happens. You know, more of the practitioner is, the more they think like that, feel that. So what determines good karma and bad karma is, again, the motivation. You know, and to be really extreme, okay, I don't want to upset anybody, but I'm doing this to be provocative. One could kill something and it not be bad karma. Conceptually, right? Intellectually, we're talking about. Because what determines the bad karma is not the action really now. It's the mind that does it. So when we talk about mercy killing, which I don't support, by the way, I can understand how people do. But we can't say, you know, that it's just bad karma. Now, I do want to say this. We do have actions that we say don't do these things because it's very hard to kill, steal, lie, all these things with a positive mind. A very, very awakened being can. It's possible, but not us. Well, I don't know where you're at. Not me. So therefore, I stick to some ethics because it protects my mind. I don't kill. I don't steal. I try not to lie. These things. Okay. Becoming intoxicated. Why? It's not because we're a bunch of purists. It's because when you become intoxicated, it's very hard to control your mind. If you can control, Lama Yeshe used to give. So we take vows as a lay person. We call the five vows. Of course, monks and nuns take these and more. But one of them is not becoming intoxicated, which is really hard for us modern people. But Lama Yeshe didn't give it when I received it from him. He did not give it in saying, the vow is to not take intoxicants. He said the vow is not to become intoxicated. Because that's the real meaning of the talk, is to lose control of your, quality of mind, so if you can have a glass of wine and go meditate just as easy as if you didn't have a glass of wine, then you would not be breaking that precept. What breaks is when you have 2 glasses of wine and you really, you lose a little control of your, anyway, you lose control, less control. That kind of thing. And then with smoking dope, it's similar because your mind tends to get very foggy. So it's sometimes hard to you can't just meditate right then. Things like that. So it's a matter of just making an assessment, actually, and eventually it's not out of any sense of purity. It's out of, again, like I used to smoke a lot of dope. I'd smoked for years, but I haven't for years. And my older son, when he was, I think he was experimenting, he's 15. He said, "Hey, Dad, why don't you get stoned anymore?" And I said, "Well, when I got stoned before, I felt better. I felt higher. Now, I feel lower because you develop some over time. If you're trying to practice, then you're developing clarity of mind, and then the lack of clarity begins to feel not as good as it used to, So it's just personal. It's nothing. It's not inherent in the substance. Wine, weed, all these things in and of themselves, there's nothing in there that's bad. It's the mind again. Okay. That's all. I haven't read anything yet today. Did we have a recording of Lama? Yeah. Oh, wait, we have one question. Yeah.
So
Try it again. Yeah, now it's working. Yeah.
my question is back. Said that it's the same perspective of like 2 different people about the third person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is something because you're
In control.
basically
Hmm. Yeah.
Help your make your perception about that person better.
Yeah. Yes, I hope people could hear that. Yeah, that again is our that would align with our spiritual practice, because if the way I interpret your question is that as we become more and more awakened or more developed, it's not just our wisdom that we're developing, our perception, it's also our compassion, which is a natural compassion. The more and more open we become, then that same person that Lee and I are dealing with, that same person, as we become more, we understand the context. Let's say that person's really grumpy, okay? Or another one, good one is like on when we're driving and people are rude drivers. It's very easy to be judgmental, especially for me. Very easy to be judgmental of the person. And I think what you're alluding to is as we become more perceptive, yes, we perceive the context of their rudeness, and it changes it. Doesn't that change everything when you know that, oh, don't give her some space because she found out her mother's dying. And once you know that, you go, oh, right? Everything changes because your perception changes. So in this spiritual path, we are consciously trying to change our perceptions, but not, and this is tricky because we are trying to change our perceptions so that they accord more with reality. So the reality is that that person is not just rude. That person being rude and grumpy is actually not very much true. When we are open up to, when our wisdom opens and our perception, our compassion also opens, same time. So then all of a sudden you're seeing that, oh, really, she's grumpy and rude because, and you go deeper, right? And even if you went as deep as seeing all the imprints of that person, and that's, can you imagine the grumpy and rude because of something that happened in a previous life that's influencing them now, their personality, it created their personality. You'd feel only warmth. I mean, you might feel frustrated because you can't help, or it feels so. Yes. So, it's always context, I guess we say. If you knew that what he is really dealing with, you wouldn't feel that way about him, right? We hear that. It's like that. Yeah, Leah. So with perception, with opening up, you see, I mean, it's a little bit scary, because when you think about that there's previous lives, and that you open up to maybe seeing that, right? That's scary. To me, it sounds scary, because it's so like, what might you see? And future lives. Now the future hasn't happened yet, so they're only trends which can be changed, but the past happened. Yeah.
Question is about, like, when I see myself taking my past experiences and like spinning.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just but it's like interesting that when you see other people doing that, what you're asked to do is be really gentle and compassionate. That totally makes sense.
Right.
Do we not push each other to see our delusions, or is it just that we're taking responsibility for our own and accepting it?
That's a good question. I think that it's so, well, first, I mean, this is what I've been thinking about lately, is to get someone else to accept theirs. Can't really happen if we don't accept ours, because they feel, they'll be seeing themselves as being lectured to, or, whatever, that we're coming off as higher, holier than thou. And so, and the other thing about that is how hard it is for someone, and it's hard enough for us to see our own crap. So how hard it is to try and impose that on someone who's not even asking you to begin with, right? I mean, it's very hard to have permission, isn't it? If you don't have permission, you don't have permission, and you're probably not going to get a good result. Is that what you're asking? Kind of like that? Okay.
Talking, I was like, I guess what I would want from people is that everyone is just compassionate of each other's crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish that too. Yeah. What's fascinating is even amongst us so-called spiritual practitioners, we're not that great at it. I mean, you see all different levels of that. And a lot of times the spiritual teachings, the Dharma teachings, are actually used to defend our lack of qualities, our deficits. That what they call it, spiritual bypassing, all that kind of stuff, which a word I shouldn't say, I don't really like, but it happens, spiritual bypassing. Oh, Leah, it's just your karma. Just accept it. That's not helpful. It's not helpful. And you can feel the person's not connecting with you. Now that may be how they deal with their stuff. That's okay. But it seems, yeah. Wow. I haven't done anything I was going to do today. Well, I mean, in a way I have, in a way I haven't. Okay. Oh yeah, the video. Let's do the video. Enough of me. And then we'll do a meditation afterwards. Oops. It's okay. Take your time.
We don't comprehend the, just how you forget, how you know are impossible, just words, it's just emotion. We say, oh, I love you, you know, actually, love is coming from you by knowing your own situation, what you are. Then this kind of sincerity comes within you, and then sincerity what you are. Otherwise, we can't go. The most of our work is attachment, okay? Purely attachment. However, sometimes you are not getting attachment. The most, even you are meditating also, more time in subject attachment. Shut up, you really shut up. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I'm not comfortable joking. True. There's only too much claim your own, comfort, your own something, concrete something, grass something. That's still selfish. Even you are spiritual trip, meditate, still selfish. So why? Why I talk about this in the emphasis? Because even you are meditative, the psychologically, effective for you is you are posted easily. Because you're looking something, concrete for you. That is acceleration. Then you are spreading the trick. You understand? So you have fixed idea. In other words, if the conceptualization equals, the fixed idea, I'm this, my realization is this, which is the totally learning so able to do realization. So furthermore, by realizing your own situation, situation and lifestyle is not something philosophical point of view. Just if you check out how your life is, how your way of thinking is, how you mistake it, how misconception is related, how you check out that, how attachment is related. By realizing this, and sort of what is your own, all universal living with this point. Then the automatic intuitive, the compassion, the love, intuitive, even you are better than the enemy, maybe, having this understanding, yesterday is sort of, or even don't want to see visualize, and maybe, next day it becomes beautiful for you. It's true, because you are protected. Isn't it? You make outside people, she's ugly, she's good, he's bad. Actually, you're making protection. Who is absolutely good in this earth? Who is? You tell me. Who is absolutely beautiful in London? Who is absolutely ugly in London? Who is? You cannot explain me. For sure. You check up that. It's really, you check up. It's internet, isn't it? I'm talking about scientific, fact. I'm not talking about something you believe. You tell me, scientifically, you tell me, this is absolutely beautiful in London. You tell me. If you are wise. No, I'm joking. Okay. Actually, check out. It's worth what really check out. We go always, we don't check it. We always go just easy. That's the lack of. This kind of, is we call sluggishness. Sluggishness, and also lack of explicit knowledge in this that nature. Okay? All right. So I think it, time to making TV, okay? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Is that clear? Yeah. Any questions? So that was the point, the more we see our situation, I think I like the way that Lama puts our situation, that's why we meditate, or part of why we meditate, is to become familiar. In the word for meditation in Tibetan, I think it's same in Sanskrit, not the same word, but the same derivative, is gom. Gom, which means to become, it doesn't mean meditation. It's really interesting. So word gom doesn't mean focus or concentrating or awareness. It means to become familiar. So that's our new understanding of meditation, is to become familiar, right? So if you begin to change this idea of what meditation could mean, why would we say to become familiar? That's quite unusual. You don't hear that much in other traditions or other explanations, do you? So in this traditions, the idea to become familiar is to become familiar with what, right? To become familiar with what? If that's meditation. With your mind. Yeah. With your intentions, which is part of your mind. So the whole functioning of the mind is what meditation is in the Buddhist tradition, this tradition. Because so now the problem or the challenge with that is that to become familiar with the mind, one thing is we need a map. What is the mind? And the second thing is part of the challenge is that within the mind, like I mentioned, one schematic is 51 mental factors. Well, 51 of them, 21 plus 6, 27 of them are not so nice. Which means you're going to be, if you're really intent on becoming familiar, you are going to become in touch with a lot of unsavory parts of your mind. Your neurosis, you know, your bipolar qualities, your depression, your anger, your resentment, your irritabilities. How do you do that? So this Buddhist approach is not for everybody, actually. It's not for everybody because it takes some courage, it takes some resilience. A lot of us, like we talk about, well, our main intention is to become happy. So then you're sitting with your mind and you're like, oh my God, this doesn't look good. This is not comfortable. Well, I'm not going to do this because this isn't making me happy. Right? So that's why Buddhist practice is not for everybody, because it's not a short term, it's not about short-term happiness, actually. You can hurt a lot in the process. It's like therapy. Therapy can hurt, you know, it can be difficult. It can be a challenge, you know. I did a when I was just 1976, we have this tradition that we do a 3-month retreat, a particular retreat that's designed, and I went into the Himalayas to do it. I had my big yogi trip going on, and I went up. This is when I was living in Nepal, of course, and I went into the mountains, and I had someone bring me food once a week, which I was cooking myself on a fire and all this. And for 3 months, this retreat was torture. Here I was in this beautiful Himalayan location. I was 3 hours from the nearest village. You know, I was right next to a very famous cave that a meditator meditated in. I was in a rock hut. I was by myself. And I mean, I did finish the retreat, but I felt like leaving every day. I'd be sitting, and we do it when you start your session, you're not supposed to interrupt it. If you interrupt it, you have to start over again. And I was doing like 4 sessions a day. Each were like 2 hours, something like that at a time, 2.5 hours. And then I had mice running across my legs, and my altar was right here. They're running around here, tipping over the water bowls. And if you move and you interrupt it, then you got to start over, you know. And then I had this idea that I took these, you know, pine tree, you know, needles, but they still had the branches on you, like the branches. And you know what happens to those after about 2 weeks? The needles just fall off. You just have all the branches, and you can't change your seat once you put it down for the first day. So here I was sitting on all these sticks, and it was so uncomfortable. I mean, anything I could find. Of course, if I had a peaceful mind, none of it would have mattered, right? My mind was very, very, very agitated. And anyway, so the point is that that retreat is that practice is designed to be very much about purification, purifying the negative qualities in the mind. And they were just coming up. I mean, it took everything to just stay there. You know, there's no one bothering me. You would say it's a perfect environment. Why are we so, right? But the mind. And another way of saying that, unfortunately, the nature of the mind is in the nature of problems. It is in the nature of suffering. And if you don't think so, which you probably do think so, but one test you can do is that when you go home later, is just go to a quiet place, get very comfortable, close your eyes and don't move at all for 3 hours. What will happen? 2 hours? 1 hour? What starts happening? The body starts, first of all, tightening up. And you can't bend your knee. You know, once you can sit in a chair, you can sit cross-legged. I'll give you that much, but you can't move once you're in there. Yeah. Sleep, fall asleep, sleep, but you can't move again. When you wake up, you can't move. What happens? That is proof. Sorry. To me, that's proof that the body and the mind are in the nature of suffering. It doesn't come from anywhere else but inside you. And we can be free of that, of course. That's the idea. To become free of it, it's like training for a marathon. You do have to exercise. And you're going to get sore muscles, right? But athletes do that because they see what they're trying to achieve. We can do it too if we remember what we're trying to achieve, which is a state of mind which is much more exalted, much more happy, much more satisfying, much more awakened than the one we're starting off with. Okay, or the one that we have. And it does work. You might not see great results for a while because the results that you're getting are that all this stuff is coming up and you're being, you're slowly purging yourself of it. Once an imprint arises, it can never rise again. That's the good news. So karmic imprint, or these mental imprints we're talking about, they only have a life of one arising. Then they're done. It's like popcorn. You can't put the corn back in the kernel. So that's the beauty of it. And that is why the spiritual path has a lot to do with whatever we're experiencing, is for us, the spiritual practitioner feels, she or he feels quite joyful when problems are arising because now they're free of that problem forever. But are there more underneath? That's the problem. And then the more underneath, as we develop a spiritual practice, we don't have to experience those imprints. We can actually purify them or, avert them. Otherwise, we go on forever and never attain any higher state of being because of countless imprints there. And also we, through a spiritual practice, we create more positive imprints, and those begin to take more power over all those, the reservoir of negative ones. So positive imprints can overwhelm the arising of the negative ones. It doesn't get rid of them. To get rid of them is a much deeper process, and which we can do. It can take many, many lifetimes even, But that process of not having those arise, one is in a better state of being, right? Doesn't mean they're gone. You eventually have to get rid of them. But not having them awaken is a huge accomplishment. And we can do that this very lifetime, this very lifetime, this very year, well, depends on the person, right? We were going to do a meditation, weren't we? Well, let's just do what we call meditation. Just give me a minute. Okay. I don't know if it's going to make much sense, but just some. Okay. There's Lama Yeshe's at this same London course. Okay, so just get settled for, it's going to be just 2 or 3 minutes. So that we end on time. So just get settled, just be comfortable, nothing special. If the best is if the spine is straight, because then it allows the energies and the breath to flow evenly. And so a better chance of clarity. Okay, and all we're going to do is check up on what we are. Okay, check up on how we exist. It's very simple. So we're asking, what am I? Okay. Am I a concrete substantial idea of this is me. Okay, so when you sit right now and ask, what am I? What should come up, what typically comes up is a very solid sense, I am this. Okay, I want you to just do that to get that feeling, oh, I'm this. You know, it helps because a person sitting near you, you know you're not them, but you're you. So get a feeling of your you-ness. Okay, this is me. And just this meditation is just about being aware of that process. I am this. I'm not that. I am this. See, you're sitting here. You're an independent being. It feels like you're an independent being. Feel that. I am this. I'm independent. Keep focus on that. And I have one more question to ask you to investigate. That I am this. Ask yourself, is that a particular color? Are you a color? Are you your body? So your body is not I, because you can see your body. I'm seeing my body. Your nose is not I. Your leg is not I. Your heart is not I. So where is that idea, your conceptual idea of ego? Where is it? And this checking is meditation. Definitely we're here, right? We're somebody, we're something. I am this. I'm here. Just for today, two ideas. One is that I is not your body, your nose, your leg, your heart. But what is that I? We call me. Okay. We'll do the second part of that next week. And the third part. Any questions? Arguments? Complaints? No? Wow. Any up there on our any of our Zoomers? No? Okay. Okay, so if you think of something during the week, I think it's, if you can remember, it's very hard to remember. Just as you're walking around, just become aware that we really have a strong sense of I all the time. And when we not fundamentally, but in this very unique spiritual practice to become awakened. So the main thing is awakening. Why else do we care what this I is? Okay, this I, the self. The reason we care is that when we get down to what's preventing us from being fully awakened are these misconceptions. Okay, the misconception that that person is really irritating. Just starting with that. Okay, that rude person on the freeway. So we have those misperceptions, misconceptions every instant. But we start with the gross ones, like he's really irritating, you know, or yeah, when I think this time I was in Nepal, I couldn't get over the fact that I've been there so many times, you know, that's well, in the last couple of years, I've gone 8 times. So just being like, oh, I'm so tired of this city, the smog, the noise, the dust, the crowds, you know, I just like, can I just have some peace and quiet? And it, you know, it wasn't like the old days. You have to get out of Kathmandu Valley to get that quiet. But the point is that's a misconception. It doesn't mean the data is not there. This is very important. It doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It's the interpretation of the something that's the problem. Okay. So it doesn't mean there's no I, that we don't exist. It's the interpretation of what I am. So we'll talk about that more maybe next week if I remember. I get all distracted. Okay. Thank you very much for coming because I'd have no one to talk to otherwise. Lee and I would just have tea or something. Yeah. And
Thanks, Karuna.
thank you, Taria.
Good
And
to see
thank
you.
you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.